Hello, everyone, and welcome to our AIM Summit webinar on trading the U.S. elections with Anthony Scaramucci. I've been so excited for this session with my friend and brother, the Mooch. This session is sponsored by Equity Group. I'm your host, Zachary Sefaradi, CEO and founder of Dayen Capital and strategic partner of AIM Summit. We have quite a big audience today, people dialing in from over 55 different countries, including institutional investors, family offices, high net worth individuals, and leaders of the global financial services industry. Please feel free. We will be taking live questions. Feel free to submit your questions at any time. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Q&A dialogue if you're dialing in through the Zoom live webinar. If you're joining us on YouTube, unfortunately, we can't do Q&A, but you can like and subscribe, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel to see more. And certainly make sure to join our live Zoom webinars so you can ask questions and engage with speakers like Anthony on the Q&A. Introducing our webinar partner, Equity Group. Equity is a pioneering fintech firm and a world-class provider of online trading technology and multi-asset financial products. The group is globally regulated brokerage with 6 financial services licenses, including FCA in the UK and SCA in the UAE, offering a wide range of top global equities, indices, commodities, precious metals, and FX. Introducing my co-moderator today, Gaurav Kashyap is the head of futures trading at Equity Group. He's set up 3 different trading desks and was instrumental in launching MetaTrader 5 on the Dubai Gold and Commodities Exchange, the first ever platform for the platform globally. As a financial commentator with a focus on global macroeconomic issues, he conducts market research and analysis for distribution amongst in-house clients, as well as providing regular market commentary to various international and local outlets across TV, radio, print, and online. Introducing, of course, none other than Anthony Scaramucci. Anthony Scaramucci is the founder and co-managing partner of Skybridge Capital. In November 2016, he was named to the President-elect Donald Trump's 16-person presidential transition team executive committee. In June 2017, he was named the chief strategy officer of the Exim Bank. He served as the White House communications director for a period in July 2017. He's also the author of 4 books: The Little Book of Hedge Funds, Goodbye Gordon Gekko, Hopping Over the Rabbit Hole, a 2016 Wall Street Journal bestseller, and Trump, the Blue Collar President. Prior to founding Skybridge in 2005, Scaramucci co-founded investment partnership Oscar Capital Management, which was sold to Neuberger Berman LLC in 2001. Earlier, he was vice president in private wealth management at Goldman Sachs & Co. And Scaramucci, a native of Long Island, New York, holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Tufts University and a Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School. You're probably also familiar with SALT, the SALT Conference and SALT Talks, which Anthony Scaramucci has built, and which is an excellent platform for connecting with people. Again, here at the AIM Summit, we always admire his work and aspire to build something as powerful as the SALT platform. Anthony, again, this election is...
You didn't mention I got fired from the White House, though, Zach. You're being a little bit... Well, you're being polite. You're not like the typical term. You could have said I got fired, but then again, well, everybody knows I got fired from the White House. You probably didn't have to mention that. That was very polite of you, though.
Sorry, was it 11 days or 12 days?
No, it was 11 days.
11
I'm a little
days.
upset. I'm a little upset with the Urban Dictionary. They have it at 9.5 to 10 days. I gotta fight it out with these guys. Okay, it was actually 11 days. When the president is calling me an unstable nut job or a low-life loser, he does reference the 11 days. So he is at least saying that it's 11 days. So that's the good news about those tweets.
Okay, well, I'll make sure the fact checkers at least know that he's gotten that one right.
All right, good.
This election probably has the most important implications for financial markets of any election in recent history. And everybody is dialing in to get your insights, your inside views on what is happening in this election. What are the expected outcomes that you see, and what is the potential impact that investors can expect on their financial portfolios?
Well, I think the problem with predictions, unfortunately, is that we always get those things wrong. But I will make some predictions, and then you guys can yell at me a week or 2 from now. I said back in January the president would not win re-election. I base that not on the COVID-19 situation, but I base it on the bellicosity of his rhetoric and the tiresome display of bullying and the style just being too over the top and frankly un-American for Americans. And so there's really very few Hollywood movies where the bully wins the movie. And even in the Midwest, you could see people were saying, okay, look, enough already. Yes, some of the policies are good, but this sort of nonsense and this sort of destabilization of what's going on in the United States, not good. And now we sit here 7 or 8 months into the COVID-19 pandemic, and let's stipulate that in the United States that roughly started in terms of the way, excuse me, shelter at home things were going on. That started probably first week of March. And so I would say 7 months later, looking at the 4 years of Mr. Trump's presidency, he's made the United States sicker, he's made it weaker, and he's made it poorer. And so those three things, in my mind, will cause him to be a one-term president. So what's interesting, if you look over the last 100 years of the modern era, presidents do not win re-election when they are in the year of a recession. So meaning if a recession has started or you're in a recession during the year of the campaigning, they typically lose. And so there's only been 2 one-term presidents since the end of the Second World War, but I predict that the president will be a one-term president. Now, there will be questions about the legitimacy of the election, which is hard to believe in the 244-year-old experiment of America, that we have an American president standing at a podium saying that he may or may not agree to a peaceful transfer of power. We have an American president that's authorized the Postmaster General to take mailing, sorting machines out of certain post office, remove mailboxes from certain areas, and to effectively slow down the mail because it's dawned on him that Democrats have a tendency to vote by mail more than Republicans. But I do think he's going to lose the election quite handily. You could look at the data, the early voting data. And I'll just point out, this will be the largest turnout since 1908 in terms of a percentage of Americans eligible to vote that are voting. 57 million Americans have voted thus far. And some of that's related to the pandemic, where early voting is open for people, but some of that's also related to, we have a full-on disaster on our hands that has to be cleaned up. Now, the good and bad news, if I'm wrong and the president wins, the bad news is that'll be a very rough 4 years for the United States. The United States will head into what I would qualify as an American winter. He will put at risk things like NATO. He will continue to try to destabilize the elements of the democracy in the US. He'll fail at doing that, of course, because the system is fairly resilient. It's been in place for a long period of time. There's a lot of checks and balances that will hold the system together. So I'm not the pessimist that these other people are, that 4 more years of Donald Trump will lead to an autocracy. You really cannot get an autocracy unless there's some agreement with the American military. Democracies don't convert into autocracies unless you get some help from the military. The president is arguably the most hated commander-in-chief in the modern era. It's not just the retired and active generals that can't stand him, but if you go through the enlisted men and women, you look at the voting, they're predominantly Republicans, and it's almost 2/3 are against him versus for him. So one last point, he's the least popular president that we've had since the end of the Second World War. He's never had a majority of the Americans, either in his average approval rating. There's one poll, which is Republican friendly, called Rasmussen, where he's been above 50%, but the average Real Clear Politics polls, as it relates to his approval rating, his popularity, or his support, has always been below 50%. And so this also speaks to the issues related to the Electoral College. I'm a fan of the Electoral College, happy to explain why. The founders of the country, it was very important to them that we didn't have majority rule or mob rule. They definitely wanted to empower minorities, and I'm not talking about Blacks or Hispanics for this. I'm talking about people that are not in the popular vote category. This is the reason why the state of Rhode Island, the least populous state and the smallest state, has 2 senators, and the state of California, the largest state, also has 2 senators. Somebody pointed out to me the other day that North and South Dakota have roughly the combined population of the island of Manhattan. They have 4 senators. And so this was designed by the founders to protect people that were in the minority. And so I like the Electoral College, but I'm hoping that Mr. Biden beats him both on the popular vote and in the Electoral College. But if I'm wrong, it's not going to be that unsettling to the markets, because Federal Reserve policy, being what it is not really going to change one way or the other.
If we are in a situation where we have a contested election, that does create quite a bit of uncertainty. When we had a contested election previously, markets suffered increased volatility. And so do you think that if we fall into a situation where the election is contested, or the votes on the day are looking more even, and Trump declares victory, but later mail-ins demonstrate that Democrats took the election, that we could expect increased volatility in the markets as a result of that uncertainty?
Listen, I mean, I think that's short term. You could go back to 2000 and the Bush-Gore. There was 37 days of uncertainty. The markets were slightly more volatile, but weirdly not that much, because the institutions and the stability of the democracy was such that people sort of believed that there would be a healthy outcome and an eventual peaceful transfer of power. I do believe that's going to be the case here again, because again, you got to have the American military on your side if you're trying to hijack a democracy and take it into an autocracy. Mr. Trump clearly does not have that. You could Google this. There's already been news reports about it. The Secret Service has already talked to the U.S. Marine Corps. They're the 2 main organizations that protect the 18 acres known as the White House and the old executive office building. And they've already had the conversation. If he's not leaving, who's taking him out of here? And it'll be the Secret Service. So, but I think it's sort of unsettling. And the problem with Mr. Trump is that we're sort of anesthetized now to his behavior. So when he says outlandish things on Twitter, or he says outlandish things at a campaign rally, or even the notion that we're having this conversation is unsettling. We're hoping that he is the outlier for this sort of outlandish behavior. And we're hoping that we'll get a return of normalcy. Either that'll be in the next several months, or it'll be 4 years plus several months, but we'll hopefully return to normalcy. I think what I'm more worried about, Zach, is the system. What I'm more worried about, and I think the people on this call and people around the world should be worried about, is we have fractured the system, whether it's in the UK, France, the United States, perhaps other parts of the world, where we've separated the haves from the have-nots to the extent where the have-nots are actually very angry about it. And so Mr. Trump actually represents an avatar for blue-collar, lower middle income anger. It's predominantly white. It's predominantly in manufacturing areas that have been blighted by globalization. And so what I would submit to everybody on this call, even if Mr. Trump leaves the stage next week or in the next several months, we have a system crisis that has to be cured. These politicians represent something. They reflect what's going on in the society. So when you're Brexiting in the United Kingdom, it's a reflection of what's going on in the society. There's a reflection of some level of discontent or feeling that people are left out of the system. Moreover, when you think about these conspiracy theories, whether it's the QAnon conspiracy theory, apparently half of Mr. Trump's supporters believe in that conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theories derive from people not wanting to blame themselves for their circumstances. And so what ends up happening is they say, yeah, it is those people at the top. They're the ones that are hijacking my life. They're the ones that are making me miserable. And there must be a conspiracy designed to do that. And so one of the things we're going to have to do is we're going to have to get responsible leadership, people in positions of power that can help those people. And I will just say this, everybody, and I think you know a good part of my life story, Zach, because we've gotten together many times, but I grew up in a blue collar neighborhood. My dad was a hourly worker. He was a crane operator, 42 years working as a crane operator, but we had a reasonably good middle-class lifestyle. It was high wages for blue-collar people in the beginning part of the post-industrial era of World War II. We've converted most of this economy into a service economy. That job that my dad had, that sand mine that he was using that crane at, is now a public golf course. There are fewer jobs like that today in 2020. But let's say that you could get that job. Well, it turns out that that job is, in terms of real economic wages, is down about 26% over the last 40 years. So that family of five that my father raised, and I would never dishonor him by telling anybody that I was raised poor. I was not. I grew up resoundingly in the American middle class. But that very same family today in 2020 could not do that on that one person's wage, given the wage disparity and the compression of those wages in terms of a cost of living. So there's pain. You're going from a generation, the generation I grew up in, which was economically aspirational in the blue collar families. Some of us, my dad used to tell us, go to school, go to college, you're going to live a good part of the American dream. But those very same families that were aspirational 3 decades ago have been converted into desperational. And so you can feel that anxiety. I don't try to demonize Mr. Trump. There are good attributes to him. I will tell you that I was on 71 campaign stops with him in 2016, and I was moved by the people that were at those rallies that feel left out of the system. I don't think it's fair to call them racist or deplorable. I think it's fair to acknowledge that there is a systemic problem. Mr. Trump is the wrong messenger for them. He is the wrong policy wonk for them. I mean, it's sort of ironic. He's obviously not a policy wonk. He's done nothing to really solve their problems, but they like him because he is sticking a finger in the eye of people on Wall Street. He's sticking a finger in the eye of the American elites and obviously the global media.
Very, very much for that, Anthony, and a very, very warm welcome to you. And on behalf of Equity, also a very, very warm welcome to all our esteemed guests logging from all over the world. It's a big, big privilege to be with you today, Anthony. Anthony, if I can just roll it back.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I can just roll it back, Anthony, of course, we deal with a lot of clients who are dealing in very, very liquid, highly volatile asset classes, be it commodities, be it FX, be it stocks, indices. So I just wanted to get your expert thoughts on this. Of course, we're entering a critical 2 weeks for financial markets. Of course, along with a third of S&P 500 companies announcing earnings, we're also keeping an eye out for global central bank policy meetings this week, preliminary Q3 GDP data from Europe and the US. And of course, this all culminates with the most important US election of recent memory, which you guys have already touched upon, taking place a week from tomorrow. So with all these key themes, Anthony, set to mature over this next 2 week window, volatility is expected to run rampant, and this will surely have an impact on market liquidity. So obviously your global investment firm, Skybridge Capital, has more than 9 billion of assets under management. Can you give us an insight on what your analysts and investment team strategy and plans are in navigating these next 2 weeks?
Well, I don't know if I'm the best guy for that, because I don't really look at things over a 1 or 2 or 3 week period of time. We're not necessarily locked in the cockpit trading. I do have a fairly sizable allocation to somebody like Steve Cohen at 0.72, who's probably more, his team probably looks at things, some of the team looks at things from a volatility or trading perspective. But here's what I would say to you. And this is mostly common sense, and then I want to talk a little bit more about the macro of what I see over the next 24 months, is that there will be volatility, but it's not going to be exacerbated volatility because the Fed has already pumped in $2.4 trillion of capital on its way to another 1.6 trillion. And so the spigot is open. I think what should scare people, though, if you take yourselves back to March, the Fed had a fairly aggressive monetary policy. Remember, they had sort of switched things up at the end of 2018 and started to lower rates again and make things a little bit more progressive and higher in terms of the liquidity profile. And yet that really wasn't enough to handle the COVID-19 crisis. And so whether you're in an S&P 500 stock or you pick the most liquid security that you can think of, things are way less liquid than we would like them to be. And so this has always worried me about short-term trading, and it's always made me concerned about leverage. And so when I look at the leverage in the system right now, I think it's okay. And when I look at where the Fed is directionally in terms of where the spigot is, I think it's okay. And so I'm gonna say something that some of your peers on this call may like or dislike. I don't think you're going to see the volatility that others think. And that's primarily because so many market participants think that we're going to see a lot of volatility. If you had said to me, you know, we're not expecting volatility right now, then I would say, okay, well, reflexively, we're probably going to get some of it. The same way March, I don't think people were expecting the pandemic. I will confess to you that I was not. I was at the World Economic Forum. I was there with people like Ray Dalio, Josh Friedman from Canyon Capital, and others. We met with a series of epidemiologists and representatives from the World Health Organization. And that was maybe January 20th. The first case in the US was January 21st. We walked out of that meeting thinking that the virus was going to be contained in Asia, that it was going to look more like MERS or SARS and not look like the movie Contagion starring Gwyneth Paltrow and Matt Damon. We missed that, and I own that mistake. And frankly, I had the worst year of my life in the month of March. So March for me was the worst year, if you will. Having said that, we've rallied back from there. But it's interesting, the hedge fund managers that were in that meeting with me all had really bad months in the month of March. So what do we know? We know we don't know. We know that we have to build our businesses stably, and we have to build our businesses with an idea towards diversity. And something that I've learned in 33 years of being in this business is the minute I start thinking I know something, I'm now in a danger zone for myself and my clients. So in quick summary, these are just predictions. This is just relative statistics. Because of the global coordination of monetary policy right now, I don't see the high levels of volatility as a result of the uncertainty around the election. And I will also say to you something that a lot of people don't believe, this is a contrarian view, is that regardless of the presidential outcome, the markets will actually be okay, primarily because of the Federal Reserve position related to market liquidity. And I'll take people back to 2008, going into 2009. The new Obama administration, they more or less had the same policies as the Bush administration did on the automobile industry, the financial services industry, et cetera. And Dr. Ben Bernanke was about to invoke the quantitative easing. And so if we get a Biden administration, first term, you're going to see many of the same things invoked there. If you get a second Trump administration, I think you'll get the same thing. The market may actually sell off with the Trump administration because it'll likely mean there'll be more protracted concern related to COVID-19. We don't have a coordinated policy in the U.S. Our statistics now are raging. We've had the highest number of cases was yesterday on a daily case count. We've got 41 or 42,000 people in the hospital right now related to COVID-19. The death rates are going up. We've ticked over 1,000 again, you know, and people are scared. And if you look at the map of cases is rising in just about every state again. And I think that, you know, without a coordinated policy, without a federal government response, you know, Mr. Trump, there are people on this call that like him or probably supporting him. They think he's good for business, but he sucks for business. Let me explain to you why he sucks for business. He sucks because he can't handle the pandemic. He sucks because he lies about the science. So you can't sit there and not fix the healthcare crisis in the United States, okay, without also trying to fix the economy, meaning you're not going to fix the economy until people fear less, they're willing to get outside of their homes more, and they're willing to transact in the economy. And with the case counts where they are right now, it is a direct reflection of his abysmal strategy and his malpractice here in the United States.
That actually leads to another interesting question from our audience. Gary Dugan, who's a friend of the long-term friend of the company and a former alumnus of AIM Summit. Trump has seemed to stretch the envelope on what he thinks he has the power to do. Are you not worried that if he had another term, he would break the rules or try to reinterpret his presidential powers to the detriment of the presumed democracy in the United States?
I am worried about that. I think Gary is right to bring that up. I am worried about that. If you go to any interview that I've had, any videos that I've had, I'm very worried about that, because if you really understand the system that America has put in place, it was the goal of the founders to diffuse the power at the top. And through that power diffusion, you would have more meritocracy. Systems that have centralized power, they typically come with kleptocracy and corruption, or they come with an aristocracy where there's a very small group of people at the top feeding off the top, where the founders are trying to flatten that out, diffuse it, so people like me, who grew up in a laborer's family, could have some level of arc of success and some level of the American dream. And that led to people wanting to come to America. You know, Lincoln said in his second inaugural address that we were the last best hope for mankind. He believed that because of the melting pot that was being created in America, and he was intent on trying to heal the country. He wasn't for the abolitionist slavery in the beginning, but obviously he moved towards that as he recognized we needed to cure or cleanse that original sin inside the constitutional documents. So yes, I am certainly worried about it, but I do think the system is strong enough to handle Mr. Trump. There will be enough people in place to reject his power. It's likely that he could lose the Senate here. It's possible, and you'd be in a situation where you have him trying to disrupt the democracy like this great orange wrecking ball, but you have other people in place trying to check his power. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I'm hoping he loses, and then I'm hoping there will be a reckoning in the Republican Party. You know, the Republican Party under Trump is becoming an aging white demographic. The Republican Party, if Mr. Trump wins, it'll be people that are buying catheters and CPAP machines and MyPillows from Fox News commercials during the interruptions of their stupid punditry. So if that's where the Republican Party wants to go, it'll be a dustbin of history sort of a party. It'll be a minority party. The country doesn't look like that anymore. And so for me, I would like Mr. Trump to lose so that we could rebuild the Republican Party, expand the tent of the Republican Party, and make it look like the beautiful, colorful mosaic of the American people, and also scale it demographically as well, and income strata, so that we can compete against the Democrats. You know, it's a fascinating thing, but the Republicans have only won the majority vote, the popular vote, one time in 20 years, and that was in 2004. And so it's a fascinating thing. We have to look at that and say, whoa, this party's heading for minority status if it doesn't fix itself. In fact, it probably already is. But no, I am worried about it, which is why I have been very vocal about trying to defeat Mr. Trump. But I'm also super confident in the system, and I'm super confident in the checks and balances. I don't think he is going to be the person that ends the Democratic experience or the Republic of America. I just either that's overconfidence on my part, naivete, or just blind drive that I believe that that's going to be the case. But we'll have to see. Worried about it enough where I'm out there very publicly speaking about this and trying to defeat him.
Anthony, if we can just zoom out from the US, and we have, of course, a very international list of guests visiting us today. If we can just focus on some of foreign policy implications of this election. Rola asks, what do you think are the main cons to the rest of the world, specifically the UK and EU, if Trump secures another term? Also, we had a question from Colin, who also asks about foreign policy. If there's a Biden victory, what are your views on what will the China strategy be in your views?
Well, I mean, it's a really good question. So let me just stipulate the following, that Mr. Trump has made the country weaker. You know, when I said he made it weaker, sicker, and poorer, let's focus on our alliances and let's say that he's made the country weaker. And so what he's done is he's repudiating and he's denigrating democratic leaders of the West or Asia, and he's offering plaudits to dictators, and he's propping up people that are in autocracies. And so I don't know, you guys may like that. Maybe some of you guys think that's the right strategy. I think it's the wrong strategy for America, and it doesn't reflect well on where America should be at this point in time. And I just want to give people historical context. You know, when the Second World War ended, the United States had about 3.5% of the world's population, 65% of the world's industrial output. And you have to think of these neo-Victorian men and women, but they were mostly men, that set forth the post-World War II architecture. And it actually started with Franklin Roosevelt. People sort of forget this, but it was in 1943 and 1944 that Roosevelt began the process of the United Nations, the acronyms of the World Bank, and all of the different things that we put together in the post-World War II architecture for there to be peace and prosperity. And what the Americans understood at that moment in time, that they needed to be a benevolent democracy, helping the world rise with its living standards. So you're going back now to the UN, you're going back now to the General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs, which ultimately became the World Trade Organization, and you're going back to the Marshall Plan. And the idea behind the Marshall Plan was to rebuild, to protect the world and to protect Western democracies and to heal Germany, frankly, and Japan. And it worked. And so what we did was we unevened the trading field. I had this conversation with Mr. Trump many times on the campaign trail. I said, well, we uneven that field to allow for a peaceful rise of living standards around the world. And what we understood is that more interconnectivity, more middle class around the world, less conflict. That worked. Over 80 years, that by and large worked. We've had proxy wars, we've had wars in the Middle East. I'm not trying to diminish them, but we have not had a global conflict, or thank God, the use of military nuclear weapons in the last 75 years. So that worked. In addition to that, the American strategy was to have a form factor of 3 or 4 to 1 in terms of military prowess. We wanted the biggest military for a reason, because we believed in the benevolence of our democracy. So we were less concerned about NATO allies contributing their 1-2%, let's call it, I think it's 2% in the treaty, because we wanted to have a military advantage. And so now here we have Mr. Trump, knuckle-dragging bully, coming into the scene, and he's rejecting this. He's rejecting this in a very simplistic form. He's not recognizing that our military bases around the world, or what we're paying for, is an insurance policy to reduce a conflict. And what I would tell everybody on this call, if you have an interest in these ideas, go back to one of the last speeches that Franklin Roosevelt made, and go to a speech that he made in 1940. You can find these on the internet. In 1940, he made a speech about American engagement in the world because he recognized if we don't engage the world, the forward disaster will be even worse. And so therefore, these are insurance policies that we put in place that have by and large worked. Now, should more people help us with that? Absolutely. But the point being is that if we have another Mr. Trump administration, he will wreck those alliances. He will retract. He will have an America strategy, this America first strategy that's America alone. Now, I'm going to tell you something about him. The good news is he's intellectually vacuous, so he doesn't even understand his worldview. Thank God Lee Bannon is out of the White House. I view that as my single greatest accomplishment so far for American history. When my suicide vest was going off, as I was getting blown out of the White House, I was reaching for Bannon, and I blew him into Pennsylvania Avenue alongside of me, because he is a white nationalist and he is a systemic danger to the world. And so I just want you to imagine him and Mr. Trump together over the last 3 years, what a disaster that would have been for mankind or womankind. And so, but I want to explain, since you've asked me, what Mr. Trump's worldview is, but thank God he doesn't have it crystallized, but Bannon did. So here's Mr. Trump's worldview. He would like to take the United States back to 1890. He would like the United States to be an isolationist country where 95% of what we're manufacturing is consumed inside the United States. So this plastic cup, if it costs $24 to produce it in the United States and a half a penny in India or China, no problem. Let's produce it in the United States. So he wants to disavow the David Ricardo idea of global trade, that no country can get exactly what it needs at the lowest price unless it's willing to trade with the other countries. He wants to disavow that. He wants to literally wall off the country metaphorically and physically from the rest of the world. That's his worldview. And now the United States may be able to do that. We've got lots of natural resources. We might be able to pull that off, but it'll throw the rest of the world into abject poverty, and there will be a crisis born from that. And so we have to stop him. And so I'm out there talking about it, okay? And I'm out there trying to explain it to people what he's really like. And so he will try to deconstruct those alliances. He'll try to retrench the American military in places where we should be. And you're asking me about the situation with China. The Chinese have a long-term plan. You know, you may not like the Chinese Communist Party, or you may like them. I'm just going to be observant about them. I'm not going to really express my opinion, but 100-year plan, a 50-year plan. Go to China 2049. The United States has no plan. We have no politician in our country that says, okay, here's a 10-year plan or a 20-year plan to fix our issues. No plan. We're just going to beat up each other on cable news every night. And so Mr. Trump's going to get annihilated by these guys. Okay. And so therefore, I would love to see Joe Biden win. And I would ask him to consider restoring TPP or entering into that contract. I think that would be a good starting place for us with the Chinese. And so I'm a student of the Chinese history. I understand where they are in terms of how they're thinking. We need to reject some of their thinking, and we need to support some of their thinking. And we may view them as an adversary or a competitor, but whether we like it or not, we've got to figure out a way to get along with each other. And I would implore everybody on this call to read Destined for War by Graham Allison, the dean of the Kennedy School of Government, which talks about these situations throughout history, rising superpowers threatening the existing power structure of the superpower. It first happened in the Peloponnesian Peninsula between Athens and Sparta. Athens was on the rise. Sparta got nervous and hit Athens. And Thucydides wrote about this in the Peloponnesian War. Everybody thought the war was going to last a short period of time. 3 decades later, it wiped out both city-states. And so what we know is there's been 16 episodic events where a rising superpower threatens the existing power structure. In 12 of those periods of time, we have gone to war. We cannot afford to do that right now. Neither country can afford to do that. So we have to work together. We have to figure out ways where we can be economically integrated, diplomatically satisfied with each other, so that we can advance our civilization, the global civilization, for greater peace and prosperity. And we have to figure out, if you're wealthy on this call, if you're an elite, God bless you, but we have to figure out a way to help our brothers and sisters, because me personally, I don't want to live in a barbed wire security compound in my McMansion while my fellow neighbors are suffering. Okay, I just don't want to be like that. So we have to figure that out. And if we don't figure it out, you're going to have the government mandating it through things that don't work, like socialism. So I'm off my soapbox, Gaurav. I'm sorry. I'm pretty fired up about this stuff because it's life or death for people. Okay, and we're at a very interesting inflection point, and we need reasoned people who understand global history and are able to respect each other and respect each other's differences. We don't need xenophobia and isolationism right now.
Rob and I, we're just chatting. We're both interested in posing the next question to you. So, I mean, you've just highlighted one of the key issues. You've been highlighting it. It's been a recurrent theme throughout this discussion. The fact that we are, in a society where the difference between the haves and the have-nots is widening, and this pandemic has experienced very much what I would characterize as a K-shaped recovery, where there has been that bifurcation has in many ways been exacerbated. Now, 6 days ago, the Justice Department filed a lawsuit against Google. Now, Google, the FANG stocks, tech companies, big tech have certainly seemed to be on the upper part of that K and have been beneficiaries of possibly the pandemic, but certainly have recovered more strongly. Now, the question here from Ikram Hawk is whether we might see a potential breakup of big tech within the next 4 years. Now, he says irrespective of who wins the presidency, but I'd like to understand, actually, is there a key difference? If we're under a Biden or a Trump presidency, do you see any difference in the position towards big tech? And this is obviously something that will affect the markets and the viewers on the session.
So I want to recommend a book to everybody. It's called Monopolized: Life in the Age of Corporate Power. And it was written by a journalist by the name of Dayen, Dayen. I think it's a very important book. I interviewed him for Salt Talks a few months ago. You could find that on our website. But I think it's a very important book that addresses this. And so to really understand monopoly power is actually long-term, very destructive to an economically organized society. And so what the current big tech guys have done a great job of is they've curried favor with American politicians. They've lobbied them and given them a lot of money. And so American politicians have been off their back, and a result of which they have created this vast amount of power. And it's destructive, because what ends up happening is, whether you like it or not, it's human nature and it's human incentives where things align. Apple will talk to Google. I'll stay out of search. You stay out of this part of the business. I'll do this, you do that. And all of a sudden you get something called predatory pricing. Now, if you read David's book, he'll tell you that we've been busting monopolies for 1,500 years. Why do we bust monopolies? Because when they get too powerful, they start to switch prices on the consumer, and they try to make themselves more and more powerful, and they try to eliminate competition. Okay, so in the beginning, it's fine. Predatory pricing, price goes down. They tell the politician, well, we've lowered the price. The consumer's directly benefiting from us. And then all the competition is dead, and then the price goes asymmetric. And so what I would tell everybody to do is go back to 1984 in the Reagan administration, a quote unquote conservative administration, where Judge Harold Green broke up the AT&T monopoly and turned it into 7 different telephone holding companies, and then said all those licenses, all those patents at Bell Laboratory that you guys have worked on, that you've been sitting on, you now need to allow companies or new companies to have a license on those things. And so what ended up happening is it unleashed this mega technological evolution for the world. And so the great irony is Google, Facebook, Amazon, all of these companies today benefited from that 1984 breakup, where we were literally paying $1 or $2. If I wanted to call Dubai, forget about it. It was a $4 a minute call. Now we're doing this call on Zoom relatively costless, if not costless. And so the point being is, you have to break these companies up. Now, those companies will be super pissed at me. I'll probably get shadow banned on Twitter for saying that, but that's fine. And it doesn't mean bad things for those companies, and it doesn't mean bad things for the shareholders of those companies. If anything, if you look at the A&T breakup and the offshoot, everybody that owned A&T that got shares in each of those other companies did very, very well. But these companies have to be broken up, and they have to be right-sized, whether we like it or not. And lo and behold, the Antitrust Department of the United States is bringing a lawsuit against Google. My last point on this, I want everybody to go back to Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt, he brought everybody into what is now the Roosevelt Room, and he basically said, hey, man, we got to cut the nonsense out here. We've got to stop the robber baron nature of what's going on in the United States. You're raping and pillaging and taking too much plunder for yourselves, and we're not helping the average person. And there was a book that moved Teddy Roosevelt that was written by Jacob Riis, R-I-I-S. He was from Holland. He was a Dutch journalist in the United States, and he wrote a book which became a bestseller in the early 1900s, How the Other Half Lived. And what he wrote about is that the East New York tenements were collapsing on each other because there were no building codes and no building standards. And these poor immigrants were coming into the country. They were building these plywood structures for them. and they didn't have the right building codes, and so these things were collapsing on each other and killing them. But these business owners had power, and the consumer had no power, and a result of which this ultimately created a long-term harm to the society. And so the irony is it's been hijacked by the left, but Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican, and he was the founder of the idea of progressivism. And what was the idea? The idea was, okay, we got to empower and protect these people. Now, listen, I'm a lifelong Republican. I may not be if Mr. Trump wins. I may have to switch parties or create a new party, frankly, because he's hijacked that party. It doesn't even look like the old Republican Party. But as a Republican, I'm all about unequal outcomes. I believe in unequal outcomes, but we better figure out a way to create a platform of equal opportunity in our country. And for that matter, your countries. We have to figure this out. And if we can do that, we'll have great peace, we'll have great prosperity. That is historically sound ideas. You can take that back over 5,000 years, and I'm telling you, that works. Okay, so where we are right now, those companies are smothering innovation just like AT&T did 36 years ago. And I would suggest to those companies, they were born from the breakup of AT&T. They need to be broken up, and they need to be broken up in a way that will unleash a lot more economic innovation in the future. So I'm sorry that's so long-winded, but if you read that book, I think he makes a very good, very crystallized statement of why we need to do this and why the companies, the shareholders of those companies, will recognize it's in the best interest of everybody, including shareholders for that matter, to do that.
Anthony,
okay, you probably
really
will never see me on Twitter again now. I'm probably getting shadow banned as we speak, which is fine.
No, you've given us a lot to think about, and of course, a very interesting reading list. Can you just remind our viewers, what was the name of the first book you had told us about, the Peloponnesian Wars?
Yeah, it was called Destined for War. Destined for War.
Destined for War, okay.
It was written by Graham Allison. And basically, he calls it the Thucydides trap, where the rising superpower is threatening the existing power structure. And without good diplomacy, communication, good understanding, it leads to war. And 12 out of 16 times it did. One of the times it didn't was the United States was rising at a time when the United Kingdom was declining, but they had enough in common with each other where they didn't cause a war. We have very little in common, unfortunately, with the Chinese in terms of political structure, religion, common law versus their laws, et cetera. And so therefore we have to work even harder to make sure that their rise is a peaceful rise, and it's successful for them and their people, but also successful for the world.
Sticking on the topic of war, Anthony, we have an interesting question here from Hamad Haider. He says, many outside the US are supporting Trump, as Trump is seen widely as anti-war, as he has started no new wars and scaled down quite a few. Unlike Obama, who played nice guy but started his share of wars, meddling in local political affairs of countries, a strategy that has been repeatedly failed for the US and the target country. What would you say about Trump's anti-war image?
Well, again, I'm not somebody that demonizes Mr. Trump. So I'm not saying, orange man, all bad and, no good. I like that element of Mr. Trump. And I have been to Afghanistan. I have been to Iraq. What I can tell you is whatever those decisions were to go into those areas, whether they were good decisions or bad decisions, the evacuation from those areas could leave vacuums. We saw that in Iraq. I was in Iraq in January of 2011. Lloyd Austin, who had taken David Petraeus' place, said that we should leave the troops at about 20,000. The Obama administration prior to that election brought the troops down to 800 or 900. The Pentagon said that would lead to the rise of Daesh. The resistance would convert into ISIS and we'd have a problem. And so we got that problem. And I would say the same sort of thing in Afghanistan. I think we're down to 3,000 or 4,000 troops. We're probably heading for zero. I hope that doesn't cause a specter or a rise of terrorism in places in the West or in the homeland of the United States. And so they're very complicated issues. I have, since I had the opportunity to read some of these intelligence briefings and have an understanding of the complexity of what's going on, I have a tendency not to criticize people on these issues. And so I do like Mr. Trump's stance. However, General Milley, Vice President Biden, you pick the national security apparatus that will be inside the White House with the vice president. I think it's consistent with that. I think America has figured out right now in a bipartisan way that we do need to retrench a little. We want to keep the global peace, but we need to retrench a little and focus on the infrastructure and focus on the needs of the American people. So I don't think the vice president represents a threat, if you will. But I do respect that about Mr. Trump. I don't want to be in the all Trump is bad category. I will also tell you that some of the deregulation that took place in the early part of his administration was very helpful to the U.S. economy.
So Anthony, I mean, you gave us a little bit about your background, that you came from humble beginnings, and something I've always admired about you as a fellow entrepreneur who, I again also came from humble beginnings and built my own business. And it's very much the American dream that you're living, right? You built Skybridge, you built Salt Conference, you were in the White House. Question that I have, I've met one of your sons, very bright. For the next generation, do you think it is going to be more difficult to potentially achieve the American dream for people that, do you think if you were an 18-year-old today or a 20-year-old today, you would be able to go on the same path to achieve what you've achieved? Or do you think that the odds are stacked against people more in this current economic environment?
Well, I can give you this statistic, Zach. You take my son, for example. He graduated from Stanford Business School in June. They unfortunately had to do it over Zoom, but I paid his tuition. And so he's coming out of school debt free. Okay, I want you to imagine my situation 30 years ago. I had a lot of school debt when I left Harvard Law School, and Tufts for that matter. But the cost of those schools now have way outpaced inflation. So by a form factor of 3. So somebody like me, I probably would have been economically inclined to go to a cheaper school that didn't have the global recognition of a place like Harvard or Stanford. And so that's one element of it. The second element of it, and again, I'm reversing, is our K through 12 public education system in the United States is very uneven. If you tell me the zip code of the student, I can tell you with pretty good accuracy whether or not they're going to get a good public school education. And so how we've allowed that to happen in the US, it's a sordid tale, but it's something that has to be fixed. Now, the bad news is it can't be fixed overnight, but could a 25-year plan be put in place to even out K through 12 education? Surely it could. You could just look at Sal Khan and what he's doing at Khan Academy and the apparatus of technology that we have now, Zoom calling, all this different stuff. We could totally innovate and change and make better our K through 12 public education system, but it is in disrepair right now. That makes it more difficult. I'm the product of a good public school. My parents could not afford to send me to a private school, but the public school system that I was raised in was quite good. There were enough affluent people in the area that they built the budget around hiring really good teachers and building a good educational footprint that allowed me to succeed at places like Tufts and Harvard. And so you need all of those things. So I would say it's harder. I would say it's not impossible, but I would say here's the economic opportunity and here's the entrepreneurial opportunity. We can figure out a way to transform it once again to revitalize the American dream. If you had said to me 1890 to 1910, is it harder for people? The answer was yes. By 1935, was it harder for people? The answer was yes. We were coming out of a depression. It was very, very bad. By 1955, the answer was no. And some things that the United States did, which were brilliant, they offered GIs the opportunity to go to college. You had Italian kids in Brooklyn who never thought of going to college that ended up going to college on the back of the government. The government paid for their tuition in college, and that transformed a whole generation of Americans. So it's harder right now, but there are policies and there's good long-term strategic thinking that can make it easier once again.
Anthony, of course, there was the amazing announcement about a month and a half ago, the peace deal that Trump brokered between the UAE and Israel. So we have a question here by David Ram, who says, it was an accomplishment that no one inside Washington could have achieved. Putting aside Mr. Trump's bully personality and policies, does he deserve the Nobel Peace Prize? So if you could speak and give your views on and your thoughts about this UAE Israel pact, which honestly caught all of us a bit by surprise.
Well, listen, as I said earlier, I don't want to demonize Mr. Trump. There's good things about him. Certainly, Jared Kushner and Avi Berkowitz, who I was very close to, both of them during the campaign. They worked assiduously on that. I actually attended the Bahraini peace conference, or the Palestinian economic proposal, back in June of 2019. And so I am thrilled by that. And I think what I would tell David is, you may remember this, I think Zach was there. We had Israeli representation in Abu Dhabi at the Skybridge Capital SALT conference in December of last year at the Emirates Palace Hotel, which was a great event for both sides. And so to me, I am super happy about that. And I do think that those are wins for America, and those are wins for the world, wins for UAE, Bahrain, Israel. And I want Israel, and David knows me, I am somebody that believes in the state of Israel. I am somebody that wants there to be peace. And I'm somebody that recognizes that we can have differences, but still overarchingly link ourselves together. And so I know that those peace deals will lead to greater economic integration, which will further the cause of peace, as we were talking about, the post-World War II era. So all those things are very positive, but he does not deserve the Nobel Peace Prize because the bellicosity of his rhetoric and the bullying nature of his personality and his supplicancy towards dictators and his denigration towards democratic leaders, he is a threat to peace. He's a threat to mankind and womankind. And so we got to remove the guy. Okay, he's also, as I just explained 10 minutes ago, his worldview about the United States is a destructive worldview. So yes, there are some good things about him. This peace deal is a good thing. We mentioned a few other things, rejection of the war status of America, trying to retract that. That is a good thing. Some levels of the deregulation is a good thing. But when you take the scales and you put those things over here, and you put the best nature of his personality on the other side, it goes like this. Okay, so no, he does not deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. He deserves to exit stage right from the stage, and we need to figure out how he got on the stage in the first place. Some of that I bear responsibility for, and we need to address systemically what we need to do to improve the United States and the world. But no, this guy does not deserve the Nobel Peace Prize for that.
Anthony, actually, I do remember very well at the SALT conference.
And I'm holding back my opinions. I'm trying to be diplomatic because, Zach told me I had to be diplomatic on this call. So I'm trying to hold back my opinions.
Well, I mean, this has been an incredible call. I can't believe we're already out of time. Actually, just to update you, Anthony, I do remember very well being at the SALT conference and seeing the Israeli delegation there. And you actually had John Medved, the CEO and founder of Our Crowd, who was the first Israeli businessman to speak at a UAE conference, particularly of that magnitude, when he spoke at the SALT conference. And actually, just to update you, about 3 weeks ago, we did an AIM Summit webinar with John Medved and Saba Al-Banali, a prominent Emirati businessman who I'm sure you've met as well. And we talked about the UAE-Israel deal. And actually, 2 days later, they announced, Saba and John Medved, that they were partnering up with Al Nabuda to launch a $100 million Gulf Tech Fund as a partnership between the UAE and Israel. So already that has resulted in some of the progress that you've highlighted. So certainly, excited to update you that since you were last here, so much has actually happened. Since that was announced, it's already materialized in investment and partnership between the two. And I think, again, that will be fostering peace and stability throughout the region. It's unfortunate. I would love to go on for another hour with you, Anthony. We've discussed so much. We've discussed, again, your outlook on the election, certainly why you think that a Biden victory is not only likely, but better for the American people. We discussed some of the market implications that may have on the way the U.S. deals with the rest of the world, its openness, whether we go back to a more Ricardian economic regime or to an isolationist regime, the impact that will have on businesses, on trading, on finance, on markets. We discussed how the policy towards China would change between the two administrations, which will obviously be affecting many of our portfolios. Again, we discussed the impact on big tech and how big tech you gave some very interesting insights on how we have to deal with monopolies, and that shareholders shouldn't necessarily be afraid that this can actually be a value creating exercise, not necessarily one that destroys value. So we really did cover so much ground. I cannot thank you enough, Anthony, for taking your time to speak with us today. Again, looking forward to having you back in the UAE. Just before this call, for all of us, everyone who's dialing in from the UAE, Anthony did say that before the end of the year, he's probably going to pay us a visit. I think we talked him into it. So hopefully we'll be having him out here soon. Would love to have you again for our next AIM Summit session. We're actually having another session tomorrow on the election. This session is going to be focused very much on the macro traders playbook. We'll have Ben Melkman, the founder, CEO, and CIO of Light Sky Macro, as well as Mitesh Parikh, the founder and CIO of Matador Investment Management, who are going to be giving us some of the macro traders insights and playbook. Thank you so much for the team at Equity for sponsoring this session. Gaurav, you were an excellent co-moderator. It was great to have you. I think this is one of the best webinars that we've done. And appreciate everyone who joined us live, asked questions. There are 31 unaddressed questions. Sorry we weren't able to get to all of your questions, but we are going to take some of those questions back and see if we can reach out to you separately with some answers. If you are joining us on YouTube, again, please remember to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel to get access to more content. But if you want to be part of the live webinars, make sure to sign up at aimsummit.com, where you can dial in, you can engage with the speakers, and we address as many of the questions as we can in these sessions. Again, thank you all so much for joining us.